The Pool
on ABC Radio Coffs Coast and Mid-North Coast.
Unigate, good morning. Well, we have Australia's largest prisoner in our listening patch there at the Clarence. We also have the Mid-North Coast Correctional Facility. And what do you think the chances are that prisoners within those jails have some sort of mental health issue? You would think pretty high, right? PTSD, trauma, an undiagnosed condition. According to the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, it's about half of the prison population, 47%, that have a mental health issue that they're trying to deal with. Now, considering that, you'd think that prisoners, while they're in the lockup, would have access to the same health professionals that they may have had on the outside, right? Like if they were seeing a psychologist, that they would still be able to see that psychologist if they were on a mental health plan, that mental health plan would continue. But apparently not. Damien Linnane is a former prisoner who's speaking out about this morning. He's going to share his story with us, his story of some of the struggles that he had, getting the help that he needed in the 10 months that he was incarcerated for. Damien, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me on the program. Yeah.
How would you rate your mental health when you went into prison?
It was actually not that bad because several months before I was arrested, so I committed a crime, but I wasn't arrested for it for a long time. But several months before I was arrested, I realized that I had a lot of trauma that was unresolved, and that was part of the reason why I committed my offence. And I went and spoke to my GP, and I got on a mental health care plan. And that was extremely beneficial. The psychologist I was seeing even wrote a letter to the court, saying how much improvement I've made. So when I went in, it was actually probably the best it had been for quite a while.
So it was good when you got in, and then once you got in, what happened?
Yeah, so, several things happened. First of all, I went in with a good attitude. Like, I'm like, I've gotten in trouble. I'm going to make the best of my time, and going to go and study, and won't go into this too much, but they wouldn't let me study at all. The only course they had was basic literacy and a welding certificate, where the wait list to get on the course was longer than my sentence, and I wasn't eligible for rehabilitation because I'd been assessed as a low risk of reoffending. So not only did I not have to do any rehabilitation, I wasn't eligible to do any if I wanted to. They reserved that for medium to high and higher risk offenders only. And but the most depressing thing was I wanted to continue with my therapy, but I had a mandatory appointment with a prison psychologist, and she told me something that has changed the course of my life. I told her I thought it would be really beneficial for me and both for society in general if I was able to continue on my getting counselling. And she smiled sadly and told me, Damien, everyone in prison would benefit from therapy, but there's no funding for that. She explained that her job was mostly to assess whether people were suicidal or at risk of escape, and also to write reports about people for probation and parole. And these reports are about prisoners. They're not for them, so the prisoners don't get copies. And so I found out that there's no general mental health treatment in prison. There is some crisis treatment. That's extremely bad, and the wait list for that is dreadful, but there's absolutely no preventative mental health treatment at all.
Wow. What was the reason that you couldn't continue, like, say, a Zoom consult or even phone consults with your psychologist?
And I only found this out. I spent my whole sentence confused about why that was the case. And then shortly before I got out, I wrote a letter to the then Minister of Corrections, and I said, well, why can't I just continue on my mental health care plan? You don't have funding to provide mental health treatment in prison, so why can't I just continue it myself, via telehealth? And the response I got to that was really terse. He just said, the mental health care plan is provided through Medicare. Prisoners don't have access to Medicare. And then he just that was his entire answer. There was no further discussion about why it might be a good idea for prisoners to have mental health treatment. He just said Medicare was the issue.
You've been looking into that because you've been studying law. Is that right?
Yes, I'm doing a PhD at Newcastle's Law School. It's due in November. It's on track to be finished, yeah.
Okay. And one of the things that you've been looking into is why and what are the laws around prisoners having access to Medicare while they're incarcerated. What have you found out?
Yeah, so for the last, so prisoners have never had access to Medicare, and just like a very brief recap, this isn't a punitive measure. It was a cost-cutting measure. Back in '76. I won't give you too much of a history, but basically, the federal government didn't want to pay for it, so they tried to push the bill onto the state government instead, and it was just assumed the state government would pick up the tab. But the reality of the situation is, like 50 years later, our entire healthcare system revolves around Medicare, and so there's certain services that there's no non-Medicare equivalent for. And so for the last, at least the last, 15 years or so, or actually since 1985, people have been calling for Medicare in prisons. At least that's how far I found the evidence back. And they've always said, we need an exemption so that Medicare can be allowed in prisons. The research I've uncovered with my co-workers is that based on how the legislation was worded and existing High Court precedent, Medicare isn't actually banned in prison. Everyone just thinks it is, and because prison healthcare is such a low priority for the government, improving conditions in prison is not a vote-winning issue. No one's ever really looked into this before, and so we've uncovered that it's completely legal to bill services to prison services in prison to Medicare. People just aren't doing it. Prisons aren't doing it, and because they've just been operating under this assumption for the last 50 years that it's not allowed.
Wow. If prisoners did have access to Medicare while they were in prison, what do you think that would achieve?
It definitely wouldn't be a silver bullet that would fix everything. So some prisoners are aware of what I'm doing, and they've written to me. They're like, it takes so long to get a doctor's appointment in prison. Like, the waiting list is horrendous. And they're like, how is Medicare going to fix that? And I'm like, it isn't. It's not going to fix everything, but it's going to open up some options. For example, at the moment, prisoners are told that if they did get an external, healthcare appointment, but through telehealth, that they're not allowed to have the practitioner bill the service to Medicare, and because of that, they have to pay full price. And people in prison, 46% of people before they went into prison were homeless. A lot of them can't afford several $100s a session. So it's going to allow people to have external appointments via telehealth a lot cheaper. And it's also going to allow prisons to bill certain services themselves. For example, as I mentioned, there are certain things that aren't available without Medicare at all. A couple of examples are the Indigenous health assessment, which was introduced in the community to try and address the fact that Indigenous people have such higher rates of conditions than other Australians, and also the diagnosis for fetal alcohol syndrome for children in juvenile detention. There's no non-Medicare equivalents of these services in certain jurisdictions, and so because of that, prisons just can't provide that service at all. And so it would allow prisons to bill those services to Medicare instead, because they can't provide them themselves anyway. And the lack of the Indigenous health assessment has been linked to several Indigenous deaths in custody. So this would drastically improve healthcare conditions for people inside, and it would also reduce deaths in custody as well.
Damien Linnane joins us this morning, a former prisoner speaking out this morning about his own struggles with mental health while he was incarcerated, and also being, having access to Medicare. You said that, there's just it almost feels like a misunderstanding. There's this assumption that you can't use Medicare, but there's no legal reason why you can't use Medicare. Where are you taking that to, that fight to?
Yeah, so I've actually talked to one of the major healthcare providers in Australian prisons, and they said they believe me that I'm right. I've got a lot of independent legal advice. All advice we've been given has told me that we're right, but this major health service have told me that unfortunately, until there's a court ruling, they can't rock the boat that much, because we know we're right, but legally it's a theory. So we're arranging a federal court challenge to seek what's called declaratory relief, to basically for a judge to rule about whether we're correct or not. That's a lot more complicated than it sounds. Federal court challenge is we've been working on this for a while, and we're getting closer. But yeah, basically we're trying to get a federal court ruling for two reasons. Prison health services probably are reluctant to provide it without that ruling, and B, once we have that ruling, they kind of have to, that they'll be legally forced to provide that. But they do want to provide that anyway. They're just unwilling to rock the boat. So yeah, that's where we're going at the moment.
Wow, that is certainly a fight that you've got on your hands there. All right, Damien, we're going to keep an eye on it too. Thanks so much for sharing your story with us this morning.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me on.
That's Damien Linnane, who is taking on that federal court challenge to make sure that prisoners have access to Medicare.